ready to start putting it back together. We're going to start with the oil filter. Before you get started, you're going to need to get a little bit of fresh oil, and I would recommend getting some fresh gloves. You're going to take the fresh oil, dip your finger in to get a little bit of oil on your tip of your finger. Use that oil to coat all of the rubber parts. Anything rubber, put a little fresh oil on it. That includes the cap and the rubber on the oil filter. Place the oil filter back in there. Put the cap on. And now you need to remember which bolts are which. The longest bolt, right here. The bolt with a funny shaped head, right here. Last remaining bolt in the other top. Now it is really important not to over tighten the bolts. If you strip these bolts, it's going to create a lot of work for you to fix. You can refer to the torque measurements in your owner's manual to see how tight they go, or the general rule, so tight enough by hand if you grab at the inside of the wrench. If you grab towards the outside of the wrench, you can create way too much torque. Now your oil filter's back together. Next, we're going to move on to the oil hose. First, we're going to replace the strainer in the frame. Simply insert the strainer where it came from, and twist it till it gets tight. Once it's hand tight, it's easiest to take the closed end of a 3/4 inch wrench, insert it over, and crank it down a little bit. Next, we're going to put the oil hose back onto the frame. First, you need to maneuver the oil hose back into the position you pulled it out from. Easiest way to do that is insert it, rotate it, and then push it through. Once it's through, make sure to re-wipe it down with a clean rag because it's going to pick up some dirt from the frame. Then simply push it back onto the frame by rotating it, and next you're going to replace the bolt on the frame. Before you reattach the hose to the frame, you want to take a little bit of fresh oil and put it on that O-ring that is on the frame. Next, slide it over the collar and replace the bolt. This is probably the easiest bolt to strip on the entire bike. I did it on my first try changing the oil a while back and got a leak. So make sure you only tighten this one to spec. Once again with this bolt, if you don't have a torque wrench, a good rule of thumb is don't ever grab your wrench on the outside. Grab it right at the head and hand tighten it. Next, I'm going to tighten down the hose clamp on the oil hose, and we're finished with the oil hose. After the oil hose is done, we're going to replace the frame bolt. And tighten it down to torque rating. After that, we're going to move over to the crankcase bolt. And tighten it down to the proper torque. And lastly, before we replace the oil, we're going to replace the oil tank cap. At this point, you should only have one piece left on your rag over there, and that's your oil filler cap. You're going to leave that off until we're done filling it. You want to get out your funnel, wipe it out with a clean rag. This is a place where a lot of grit and grime will stick in between oil changes. So we're going to wipe this out and then fill the oil. What oil you choose is up to you. I'm using the Honda GN4 semi-synthetic oil. I know it takes more than 1 quart, so I'm just going to dump the entire first quart in. After you're done with the first quart is when it gets a little tricky. The 0.3, 0.4, whatever your bike is supposed to take is where it gets complicated. It's definitely worth doing a conversion so you can just find it on the lines on the side of the bottle so you know exactly how many lines there are. On the second quart on my bike, I use about 12 to 14 ounces. Kind of depends. I put in 12, I warm it up, I see where it's at, and I might add a little more. Usually it winds up being somewhere around 14. Once you've put the oil in, remove the funnel, get your oil filler cap and really wipe it down so there's no grit on it. Replace the cap, and it's time to find out if we got oil pressure. To check if you have oil pressure, you want to loosen this bolt right here. This may look a little different because I have my AIS system removed, but it should be in the exact same place. So loosen it very slightly, just enough that it's not connected there, and then you're going to start your bike and warm it up. If you don't see any oil coming out right here within about a minute, you better turn your bike off and something has gone wrong. Before I start the bike, I usually just run the kickstart just a couple times to put a little oil through the engine. There's a little bit of oil, so it's all set. After you've checked the pressure, go ahead and tighten that bolt back up. Make sure not to over tighten it. It's an 8mm socket, and an extension does help on this. There are a couple of last things you need to do. You need to replace the frame guard and the skid plate that we took off at the beginning. You need to warm up the bike for about 5 minutes and then let it cool down for another 5 minutes. After that, check the level of oil on the stick and see if you need to add a little bit of oil. And that's it. You've changed the oil on a WR250 2006. Please remember to follow the instructions in your owner's manual and you should be good to go. Thanks for watching.